This video is a read aloud for SMS NTI Day 19. This is the formative assessment for 7th grade language arts. So as I read this, feel free to pause it, rewind it, take your time with it, and here we go. Read both scientific articles about endangered fish. Then answer the questions that follow. From Big Fish in Troubled Waters by Stephen Orns, Science News for Kids. Paragraph 1. You may have heard the popular saying, there are always more fish in the sea. But, as a number of new studies show, the truth of that statement depends on the kind of fish. Fish populations are changing, and not necessarily for the better. Consider the case of big predatory fish. These giants, like sharks and cod, devour other, smaller fish. Big fish are an important part of the marine ecosystem, which includes the ocean and all the things living in it, because they keep down the numbers of smaller fish. Without fish that eat other fish, populations of smaller swimmers could swell. More of these smaller fish would devour more plants, leaving less vegetation for other organisms, or for future fish. As fierce and ferocious as predators can be, they're no match for fishing technology. Many people love to eat predatory fish like sharks, cod, and tuna. According to 2 new large studies, these giant predators are becoming scarce. One study shows how the populations are decreasing. The other shows how fishing hauls or the amount of fish caught have changed. Together, the studies suggest that overfishing threatens the creatures near the top of the marine food chain. In one study, Billy Christensen and his colleagues looked at 200 past studies of marine life to learn how fish populations have changed over time. Christensen is a fisheries expert at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. The oldest studies his team looked at dated to 1880. The most recent were published in 2007. In these 200 studies, researchers counted and described all the different types of life in small oceanic ecosystems. Christensen presented the team's findings in February at the 2011 meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in Washington, D.C. He reported that between 1910 and 1970, the numbers of big predators decreased slowly. In 1970, their populations really started to drop. Around that time, fishing ships began using new tools that led to catching more fish. The numbers have been falling quickly ever since. Now, the numbers of these big fish in the ocean is very low. Christensen reported that today there is only about 1/3 as many of the large fish-eating fish as there was in 1910. That means for every 3 you might have found in 1910, now you would only find 1. Christensen said the future looks increasingly dismal for these giants. We see no indication that things are improving, Christensen told the audience. It's a pretty bleak situation. While Christensen looked at the problem from the perspective of the fish, Reg Watson approached it from the perspective of the fishermen. Watson, a biologist, also at the University of British Columbia, studied the increase in fishing in recent decades. Like Christensen, Watson reported his findings at the AAAS meeting. In the middle of the 20th century, Watson reported, fishing boats didn't venture far from home, and most fish were caught near the shore. That wasn't true in the 1980s. By then, he said, fishing had moved farther from shore, into the open oceans, and it was helped by the development of new tools and technologies. These advances helped a lot. In the 1990s, fishermen hauled in 5 times as much fish, by weight, as they had in the middle of the century. But since the 1990s, something has changed. Despite new technologies and more effort, fishing operations have not continued to boost their hauls. If there are fewer fish in the sea, fishing companies may have a hard time keeping up with the demand for fresh fish. The studies by Watson and Christensen don't paint a promising picture for sea predators. These scientists studied historical data to understand the present, and this research is needed to forecast the future of fish and fishing. And the forecast doesn't look good. Large predator fish are becoming harder to find, and there may not be more in the sea for long. Passage 2, Protecting the Oceans, One Choice at a Time, by Oscar Seaver. When the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, introduced new dietary guidelines in 2010, one of its key recommendations was to eat seafood twice a week. Seafood is higher in protein and lower in fat than other animal proteins. Also, many fish and shellfish are rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3s have been shown to have many health benefits, including the support of heart health. If all Americans were to follow this recommendation, however, consumption of seafood in the United States would double. While this would be great for people's health, it could pose a problem for the world's oceans. Current fishing practices are already reducing the populations of many seafood species to the point of collapse. If we want to have access to seafood well into the future, we must take steps to preserve and renew the ocean's bounty and encourage others around the world to do the same. Action from world governments will be vital to sustain seafood populations in the oceans that cover 3/4 of Earth's surface. But there is something you can do as an individual, too. You can exercise the power of your fork and avoid eating seafood with populations that have become endangered. When choosing which seafood to buy and eat, there are two important factors to consider: the species of fish and where it was caught. The bluefin tuna is critically endangered and has been overfished all over the world, largely due to its popularity as a sushi fish. This huge fish, which can grow to be 10 feet long and weigh 1,400 pounds, is popular with fishermen. Just one fish can be sold for up to $100,000. But if enough people avoid this fish, the demand would go down. Fishermen wouldn't have as much reason to catch them. Tuna fans can still feed their cravings by choosing more abundant big eye or yellowfin tuna. The Atlantic halibut is another large fish, which can grow to be 9 feet long and 1,000 pounds. It is particularly vulnerable to overfishing due to its long lifespan. It can live to be 50 years old, and it doesn't reach reproductive maturity until it is between 10 and 14. Halibut caught before they reach maturity never get a chance to reproduce, damaging the entire population. The United States has banned Atlantic halibut fishing in its waters. However, it cannot regulate fishing practices on the high seas, the large areas of ocean outside of any individual country's control. Luckily, there is a good alternative to Atlantic halibut. Its relative, the Pacific halibut. For those who like eating lobster, paying attention to where it comes from can protect some lobster populations. Spiny lobster from the Caribbean and South American are threatened, but spiny lobster populations in Florida, California, and Mexico's Baja California are still in good shape. Your local seafood market should be able to tell you where its seafood comes from. If they cannot, consider a surer option, such as an American lobster from Maine. If this all sounds a bit complicated, don't worry. There is information available on which to base your seafood eating decisions. The Monterey Bay Aquarium, one of the top aquariums in the country, maintains a complete, easily printable buyer's guide. This list tells you which seafood species from which sources are the best choices, which alternatives to consider, and which species you, the consumer, should avoid. By paying a little attention to the seafood you're eating, you can avoid contributing to the problems faced by endangered fish species. Change won't happen overnight, but every choice you make can help protect an ocean ecosystem near you. Question 1. Which of the following best sums up how the focus of Big Fish in Troubled Waters differs from Protecting the Oceans, One Choice at a Time? A. The first article explains why people love to catch large predatory fish like cod and tuna, while the second explains the life cycle of large fish such as the Atlantic halibut. B. The first article explains why predatory fish are important to the ocean ecosystem, while the second explains where to find information about fish that are rich in omega-3s. C. The first article explains the causes of declining fish populations, while the second explains the connections between the creatures in the ocean food chain. D. The first article explains that overfishing is threatening some fish populations, while the second explains how to save some fish species by making careful decisions about meals. Please pause the video as you make your selection. Question 2. Which of the following pieces of key information is used in both articles? A. Spiny lobsters from the Caribbean and South America are endangered. B. Fish populations are changing or decreasing, leaving some species at risk. C. An increase in smaller fish means a decrease in the food supply for predatory fish. D. The health benefits of eating fish and shellfish is creating a high demand for them. Please pause the video as you make your selection. Question 3. Which statement best describes the purposes that shape the author's presentations of key information in the two articles? A. Both authors are trying to convince the reader to agree with their points of view. B. Both authors give facts as evidence to support conclusions. C. The author of the first article uses facts and then draws a logical conclusion. The author of the second article uses facts to move the reader to take action. D. The author of the first article gives reasons and evidence to support his opinion. The author of the second article uses facts and reasons to predict future trends. Please pause the video as you make your selection. And question 4. Compare and contrast the ways the authors shaped their presentations in the two articles. Describe how their use of key information helped them achieve their purposes. Use at least 3 details from the text in your response.